outside of being with my wife, Mary. Okay, just, we're out on a date, and we went on a date last week, too. It was a pretty big deal. Like, went to, had dinner. It was a really nice night. But outside of that, okay, what I enjoy is being with our players. Like, that's fun in coaching.
Date nights and spring football. That's what Kirk Ferentz does. Welcome to our spring preview edition of Eye on the Hawks here on Thursday, March 27th, the Sweet 16, and Eye on the Hawks getting back into football. The world is spinning in a beautiful way. Mitch Fick, Owen Sebring, Mike Howell here. Lots to get to. We'll overreact to the two deeps because it's that time of year. Hear a little bit more from Coach Ferentz about the quarterback room and just the massive shift we've seen over the last year since last spring, getting into Iowa's portal approaches. We've seen a couple guys just ahead of spring practice jump into the portal as well, and hear from the guys that have been training for the NFL draft. Hawkeye Pro Day was on Monday. We got to hear from 5 of the 14 Hawks that worked out. But first of all, we had Kirk Ferentz's presser yesterday. Owen, you were asking about Ben Keeter, and we learned a little bit of stuff, but also it was March 26th. You don't learn everything day one of practice, but just your first thoughts coming out of that presser, and Mike, you as well as you listened in from back here.
Well, regarding the Ben Keeter news, of course, I'd been curious about this. I think we've all been kind of invested in this story for a few years just because it's such a unique one in Hawkeye history, a guy who's trying to compete in 2 different sports at the University of Iowa, so trying to do wrestling and football. Last year stepped away from football to focus on wrestling and finished with an All-American season as his redshirt freshman year ended. And Kirk didn't have a whole lot of answers. I know in Ben Keeter's post that he made after the season, he was like, hey, proud to be an All-American, focusing on football now, something to that nature. Yeah. And so I asked Kirk, I was like, oh, has he been working out, or is he back with you guys? Because he's not on the roster as it stands right now. And Kirk seems a little unsure, I guess, or he just hasn't really had those conversations with Ben right now. So I'm still kind of finding out, but I think it's a story that a lot of people are I think we'd all like to see that come to fruition. It's a fun idea, somebody that's able to compete in both sports through two different seasons, but at the same time, I think Kirk hit the nail on the head, kind of saying this guy could be something pretty special with wrestling. So if he wants to focus his energies, kind of like Brody Brecht a couple years ago, who ended up being, in the 30s round MLB draft pick, is now working with the Rockies as opening day is today.
Yeah, happy opening day to everybody. Yeah.
And so he's got a chance to be a pretty special wrestler. So I think Kirk just doesn't want to potentially jeopardize that by throwing him out on the football field too. But outside of the Ben Keeter news, I would say no major observations. It was fun to hear him talk about Mark Gronowski, his development. It was cool to hear him say such glowing things about his mental acuity. He said he's smarter than the entire coaching staff combined. So seems like he's a smart dude. And I'm just really looking forward to talking to Mark. He seems like he's an interesting cat. Coach Ferentz says he's a little bit quiet and humble, but interesting guy.
Yeah, the Ben Keeter, outside of the interesting storylines of playing of wrestling and playing football, linebacker is a spot where you just lost 3 starters, right? And you have a lot of unproven guys there. So all the help you can get at that position especially could be pivotal next season. The other thing I thought was interesting, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about it, is the new offensive analyst, Ruggiero, how he's going to fit in this staff, how he's going to, on a week-to-week basis once the season starts, and we'll hear a little bit from him later on that.
Yeah, I'll talk about it right now. We don't have a soundbite about it, but Kirk basically said he's going to be essentially an advanced scout where, they get heavy into the film on Sundays, both what happened on Saturday and maybe starting to get into the next week's game plan, and then you go super heavy on practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's been the system they've had since they made that switch in 2015, and it worked awesome right away. But it sounds like Warren's role, a guy who knows offenses and knows how to keep the ball moving, he'll be the guy who's looking ahead to the next week, so by the time you're getting ready to flush or move forward from the previous week, he's already on top of it. So I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic and something to check back into, especially getting into early October, getting into the heart of Big Ten season. Hey, how is this new little wrinkle to the approach they've used for the last decade? How is bringing in a guy who's got all this coaching experience and some great Power 4 stuff with Dave Clawson down at Wake Forest, what is he able to do in this new Iowa regime? Because Kirk brought it up, he likes to keep things small. He talked about the fact that, if you told him 27 years ago, there wasn't social media, but the idea that there's a lot of people that work for the University of Iowa doing social media, he has still tried to keep his coaching staff relatively small, keep it, you got your position coaches, and maybe not a whole lot more beyond that. So the idea of bringing in analysts is a little bit of a newer concept for Iowa. We've seen a lot of other programs do it, though, and well, you get a guy like that who can be an analyst, whether it's for a year or some extended amount of time. You'll take a great football mind, and that's what Kirk said about Warren, is that he's a football guy through and through.
I don't know why I thought we had the soundbite for that. I've looked at the rundown even before.
Talked about
anyway,
it.
When I was looking at some background for Ruggiero, and I kind of stumbled upon it because, over the past few weeks, when these hires happened, I haven't really been paying too much attention to football. It was basketball, and I didn't know he was the 2021 Bryles Award finalist.
Yeah, he's a Royals finalist, yeah.
So, that's a huge, to have someone with that capability on the offense, and we know what Wake Forest did over the past few years, what he did and what he can bring to that offense this year will be interesting. And I was also reading, I think, a John Steppe article where, kind of forgot about this, the 2024 rule changes states that analysts can now, on-field coaching can now do that. So that's just another aspect. I remember when John Bunmeyer came in as an analyst, that wasn't the case. He couldn't really do that coaching once the season started. Fun fact, in 2021, two other finalists in that were Dan Lanning at Georgia, who's now at Oregon, and Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator for Ohio State, who just won a national title. So,
yeah, it's I forgot about this until it was brought up last year. Dan Lanning was a GA with Pittsburgh in 2011 during that crazy comeback for Iowa. James Vandenberg,
oh, no way.
Davis, and
that
Mark
game?
Manley. So yeah, that was when Iowa plays Oregon. There's your questions to Dan Lanning about what he remembers from that 2011 game, because it's as wild a one we've seen at Kinnick, and that's saying something.
Quick fun fact about that game. I was still a student, and I was there with my buddy Patrick, and it was like the third quarter, and they were down like 25 or something, and we're like, all right, we're going to go to the bar unless they score on this drive. And we kept doing it, and then eventually, they took the lead and won that game. So
that was a fun one. Well, we talked about the two deeps a little bit, particularly linebackers. Let's take a look and overreact. This is the Bible. This is everything that you will believe in for the next 6 months. Nothing will change. Everything is set in stone. At least that's what it feels like sometimes, doesn't it, when you look at these things? But here is a look at your offensive depth chart. There are no transfers on this yet, so keep that in mind. So you've got Brendan Sullivan taking your 1 reps. Again, Mark Gronowski still recovering from the surgery he had coming over from South Dakota State. Hank Brown, the Auburn transfer, in there at QB2. Very interesting dynamic, the competition between him and Jackson Stratton. Kamari and Jazzy and Patterson, your running backs, Reese Vanderzee, Dayton Howard at 1 wide receiver slot. You got 3 of them set up here on the depth chart. Seth Anderson and KJ Parker, Matt Bowen's guy out of Immaculate Conception there. Started hearing a lot more about him in the bowl prep. Jacob Gill and Caden Weegan. Speed, you got that there. Addison Estrenga, Zach Ortworth at the tight end spot there. Of course, you lose Luke Lachey. We'll hear from him in a little bit about draft prep. And then an offensive line that features familiar names, but a couple big ones missing, especially Mason Richmond. 50-plus starts there at left tackle. Jack Dotzler will step in and hopefully fill the spot for him well. But you got Bo Stevens back, Logan Jones back. Cade Pieper, a kid we've been talking about a lot, the defending Solon Beef Days hay bale toss champion, slotted in there as a starting right guard. And then Jennings Dunker coming back again, holding down the right tackle spot. Thoughts on the offensive depth chart and thinking about the transfers that we assume we're going to see in there at some point?
I'm maybe not smart enough to know about the inner workings of an offensive line, but when you've got a guy like Jennings, why not move him to left tackle if he's like your experienced and probably your best offensive lineman this year? Is he just so skilled at right tackle that it would like kind of mess things up to move him to left? Or I'm just kind of surprised to see him still listed at right tackle on there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it goes to personnel. Remember, Tristan Wirfs played right tackle, but Alaric Jackson was more comfortable at left. So in that scenario, I remember hearing that Wirfs could play either one because he was so talented, but Alaric Jackson was better at left, so they kept him there.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a situation here, or if Jennings was the right tackle last year. So
I feel like this has been talked about. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought it came up in bowl prep too. Of like, yeah, Jennings is still your right tackle going into 25, but hey, wherever you put him, he's seemed to have success, and he was one of the better offensive linemen across the Big Ten, if not the country, in 2024. A big year for Jennings, but Kirk saying yesterday too, a lot of fluidity, as it usually is in the spring when it comes to two deeps and who's going to go where. He goes, well, at least we know who our center is. Logan Jones. I don't think you can really understate how important it is having a guy like that back.
Yeah. Maybe another thing that's like not a surprise, but I'll be interested to see the development of the running back spot. Last year, of course, we had I think LaShawn Williams was
LaShawn was still there, yeah.
RB1 to start the season, and obviously that changed with Caleb. I think
Well, to start camp, Moulton was number 1 heading into the first game.
Yes, that's right. Because LaShawn, I think, was still dealing with an injury in week 1.
He was banged up. Well, he was banged up for spring, too. He walked into the spring with a boot on.
But nevertheless, just curious to see how that running back room works out. I mean, we've seen a lot of great things out of both Kamari and Jazz, and so I wonder, like, will Kamari keep number 1 throughout the season? Are they going to add somebody? Will Jazz take over like Caleb did last year? Running back is a really intriguing position for me to watch.
Yeah, of course, you got Terrell Washington, first career score in the bowl game against Missouri, and you also have Brevin Dahl, who everyone's really excited about, as well as Xavier Williams, who was a redshirt guy in the running back room. Of course, we assume Mark Gronowski is QB1 there. Very interested to see where Sam Phillips out of Chattanooga fits into all this in that wide receiver room. Noticeably missing, and we didn't hear anything about any surgery or anything like that, Jarriett Bowie, who had a few catches in the bowl game and was getting he was getting reps with the ones back in 23. Didn't have a reception, his first one in college, until last year, but he is not among those 6 there listed. I would have to think Bowie and certainly Sam Phillips, that kid could be something special, something to watch for Iowa, but you imagine they will be in there as well, and Addison Estrangen and Zach Ortworth, maybe the most established representatives on the skill position chart there.
Yeah, my 2 question marks. Well, first, before I get to that, is this the death of the fullback? Because fullback, I went back to check last year. They had fullback
Where's
on the
my
depth chart.
Hayden Large, who is also back?
He's on the roster listed as fullback. He's the only one, and usually they have a couple, but they didn't list him in the depth chart. I wonder if this is just year 2, the evolution of a Tim Lester offense, and where I'm sure Hayden Large is going to get in there, and there's going to be fullback sets, but maybe less so than in the past.
Yeah, but I think it tells you maybe the default is going to be 3 wide.
Yeah.
Which, hey, again, my college football 25 video game mind is thinking, boy, if you get Caden and Seth and Sam Phillips, these 3 burners where you just have 93, 95 speed guys running around, like pick your poison, that would, that's how I think about stuff. When you put in your cornerback to play at quarterback just because he's fast, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the wide receiver room just because you've got some experience coming back. Reese had a breakout year when he was healthy. Jacob Gill
was impressive.
Terrific. And again, Seth's problem is he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. I mean, we've seen when he's healthy, he can be a burner. Dayton had a breakout. KJ Parker's been talked about. Caden's fastest guy on the team. You could probably make the case. It's going to be interesting, and I think Sam Phillips is going to be super fun to see develop here at Iowa.
Hayden Large is listed on the online roster as a tight end.
Oh, really? He's not listed on the, what's that called? The amicus or
the
brief?
Prospectus.
Syllabus
Syllabus week.
He's
for,
listed as a fullback on here.
Interesting.
We should point out, too, James Rezar is listed in the prospectus. If you're watching on YouTube here, we've got that in our hands that you can get the PDF version on the Hawkeye website. We got the carbon copies here. He's not on the roster.
Online.
He's in here, and as of like a few weeks ago, he was posting videos of him throwing, getting back to being a quarterback. So I don't think he's here. He announced he was going to the portal in December, but we'll keep an eye on that. There's open practice next Thursday morning, so we'll keep an eye. If there's a 10 out there running routes, some 6'4" kid from Jacksonville, we'll get back to you on that. Any other thoughts on the O-line? Cade Bowrud, who was a transfer from North Dakota, he's not on there from last year. He transferred in. Interested to see where he maybe fits in the 2 deeps there at some point.
Yeah, my two points I was going to make before I went to where's the fullback? Last year they added the wide receiver, a 3rd wide receiver on the depth chart. So I think it's just Tim Lester, making his changes.
Again, it's spring 2 deeps.
Yeah.
Overreact. Get super mad.
I think, at wide receiver there's potential, but there's still only a couple guys where I'd say that have proven it, and that's Jacob Gill and Reese Vanderzee, albeit in a few games. But I do, and might be year 3 of me saying Caden Weege needs to get more catches in that passing game. But there's potential there. And, this is the time where they get the reps, they get time to grow, and maybe the offense develops in year 2. But the offensive line, I think, you know the names, but on a team that relied so heavily on running the ball and using that offensive line, you love that it's anchored with Jennings and Logan. And you like what you have in Cade. Bo Stevens,
a bit, but you bring back 60% of that line, and Cade's gotten so much.
There's just, unproven guys that need to step it up, and that's what usually happens in this Iowa offensive line. But you just have to see it first. So those are the 2 points that I was going to make.
Yeah.
Should we flip to defense? Kirk pointed it out in the presser. Kind of got a 180 topsy-turvy situation here where you've got a lot of experience on offense, familiar names on defense, but maybe less experience than is on the offensive side of the football. And again, you got a couple transfers on the defensive line that are not represented there, in Bryce Hawthorne coming in from South Dakota State, and your Central Michigan transfer, Jonah Pace. You would imagine those guys getting that rotation there too, but your front, I mean, you like what you see there. Ethan Herkett back, Max Llewellyn on the other end. What a breakout year he had in 24. Aaron Graves, Jeremiah Pittman there with Will Hubert, Luke Gaffney, Lynn Marzone backing up there, and Joseph Anderson and Kenneth Merriweather, who got a little bit of run last year, had his first career sack on that front four. And then the linebacking core, familiar names in unfamiliar spots. You've got Jackson Recktroth in that Cath spot. Jaden Harrell, Urbandale teammate of Max Llewellyn's back in the day. Heard a little bit about him last year. He steps into the Mike spot. Carson Scharer, seen a lot on special teams. He had a couple big hits in the Music City Bowl. And then TJ Hall at that left corner. Deshaun Lee, right corner. Cohen Entringer in there as your starting strong safety as Xavier Wampa moves over to free safety. And
I like that move.
We've known with Quinn Schulte what an important position free safety is. So Xavier replacing a Xavier grad there as we take a look at those two deeps.
The pronunciation guide on Iowa's website pronounces Carson's last name as Shire.
Shire.
Carson Shire.
It's one of those you kind of just lose.
Baggins?
Carson Schur. I just know Carson with a K hits hard. Going back to, there was a special teams play he made in 23 against Minnesota where he popped a dude. That was the one where he got called for targeting and they overruled it. But that kid's laid the lumber on special teams, and now he gets a chance to do it so far, at least in the starting linebacking core there.
Yeah, I still see so much. I mean, the front four and the back four, you see so much experience coming back. I counted last night. I think there's like 10 returning letters on the starting secondary, I believe, between those four guys. Like, that's a lot of experience you're getting in the secondary. A lot of great stuff on the front four. Linebackers still, I think we're going to enter the year as a little bit of a question mark, even though we've seen a small taste of what these guys can do on special teams and in some like late in game scenarios. Like, these are guys who are a lot more unproven and still have something out there that they need to kind of prove to people, I guess, or prove to coaches. Yeah, so I'm curious to see how these linebackers develop. I love seeing Derek Weiskopf there at the number 2 spot at the cash spot. He came in with that freshman class of linebackers that were so talked about in this area between Weiskopf, Preston Reese, and Cam Buffington. Weiskopf is the first one that we're seeing actually add to a depth chart situation, so curious to see how much he ends up getting in there, both either on defense or on special teams.
I think that oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you look at the D-line and in the corners and in the secondary, and you like the starters, but you know you need depth at those positions because injuries always happen. Last year I don't think it really happened in the D-line, but
That's knocking on wood for those
in
now.
the secondary it did. The year before, the secondary really didn't see any, but a lot of unproven guys in the back, and obviously the D-line, like you said, those 2 transfers coming in will be in the immediate rotation, if not, one of them starting. The D-line, I think, is the strength, and I like when your strength is your D-line, right? It also, if they can come in and perform and get pressure on the quarterback, it will take a burden off the linebacking core, who's young, not necessarily young, just inexperienced in game time, right? Because they've been sitting behind Jay and Nick, and oh my God, I'm forgetting the third guy, Kyler Fisher, yes. But that's where I'm seeing like excitement for that D-line, When Iowa's good in the past, you think of like 08, 09, 2002, their D-line's just excellent. And you wonder if this team with Aaron Graves and Ethan Herkett and Max Llewellyn and those 2 transfers can really take it to the next step.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be fun. Kelvin Bell and Jay Neiman really building something special there in the front four. And specialists, the guys maybe the most experienced out of the 3 position groups. Drew Stevens back, Reese Dakin, great freshman year for him. Ike, Speltz, no pressure, bud. Just step in for Luke Elkin, who we'll talk about NFL draft prospects coming up in a bit. 15 years down the road, Luke Elkin might be the guy you look back and say is, if he can find a good spot in the NFL, long snappers can have long, lucrative careers there in the league. Well, let's circle back to quarterbacks, though. Of course, got to talk about him in Iowa City. Mark Gronowski out for the spring. A lot of extra experience in that room, though, far beyond what we had going into 23 and even 24. You got 4 guys on that roster that have started for Power 4 teams. Let's hear from Kirk about what he's looking for this spring in that quarterback room.
We feel like we know the most, ironically, about Mark, even though he's not practicing. That doesn't make sense. But it's contradiction in terms, I guess. But, he's played the most, and, he's got that production. So, that's a starting point. And then the guys in the room we're really excited about, but none of them have, played 20 games or, 30 games. So this is a really good opportunity for them. Obviously, Brandon's a hell of a lot more comfortable now with what we're doing than he was a year ago. He got here in June. To me, it's amazing what he did pick up in a short amount of time. And the same thing with Hank. And, you got Jimmy there, and then Jackson's back, too. So we're just going to let those guys practice and play and all that kind of stuff. And then whenever Mark's able to join us back, and really, we're not going to be evaluating or competing until August, then we'll go through that and just see what happens. But overall, the whole room is, pardon the pun, it's a lot healthier. And I just think we've got a better situation than we've had.
What are you guys looking for this spring? No Gronowski. You got the battle, you would imagine, between Hank and Jackson for who's going to be QB2 in the spring, QB3, you would assume, in the fall, depending on if there's any other movement. And then you got Jimmy Sullivan. People are high on him, and you'll have Ryan Fitzgerald joining the room at some point. And, yeah, I mean, it's a far cry from where we were last year, just in terms of, to Kirk's point, health and just experience. I mean, QB4 last year was Tommy Pahalski, who was a legacy guy. He's at Colorado State now. QB4 now is the guy who went into Maryland and won a game for you. And that's it's good to have experience, no matter where it is on the depth chart.
Did I hear right, Kirk, yesterday saying something about the number of people that have gone in the portal from Iowa is like low on the chart of guys of schools who have had people enter the transfer portal?
I think he might have been talking about the number of transfers they have. The number was 5.
Oh, that they've added, actually?
They've
yeah,
added
yeah.
Gronowski,
It's kind of low compared to
Phillips,
major football.
Pace, Hawthorne, and Hank Brown. I believe those are the 5. I might be missing one, but I think those are it.
No, I think it's 5. They said 5 in
Yeah.
their one of their press things.
Which, again, I don't know if a lot of schools are going to be that way just because of the changes to rosters
sizes, yeah.
right now. Like if there's, as we saw with recruiting day, they only have 2 high school recruits coming in. And so there's just not a lot of room for portal additions either. But kind of an interesting space that they're in. I mean, maybe the fact that they only do have 5 transfers coming in also speaks to the fact that there have not been a lot of guys who have left the roster as well. There are not a lot of open positions for guys to be taking in the portal right now. So speaks to something that is going on in the Iowa program, that there's not a lot of dudes that are leaving unless it's kind of for reasons that, for playing time reasons, largely. I mean, pulling up the list of guys from Iowa that have left somewhere, I mean, just this week we saw that Max White and John Nestor are going somewhere else. The D-back spot does make a little bit of sense just because of the amount of experience of guys coming back this year. It's like it's going to be tough for guys like John Nestor or Graham Eben was another D-back who transferred, and it's like those guys just weren't going to see the field a whole lot this year based on the experience that was coming back. Graham Friedrichsen, wide receiver, went to UNI. Jeff Bowie went to South Dakota. Rusty Van Wetsinga, who's the other? Oh, Johnny Pascuzzi went to West Virginia. So they've had a small handful of guys who've left, but mostly guys who just kind of knew that they wanted to go somewhere to basically find more playing time.
Yeah, we'll hear from Kirk about the portal and their philosophy on that coming up in a bit. Mike, what are you looking for in the quarterback room?
Here's a perfect scenario for me. Like, obviously, Mark plays almost every snap next year, and he's your guy. Is Hank Brown a guy you're confident in next year? Or is it, the younger Jimmy Sullivan or Jackson? I think if either one of those two are playing this year because of injury, that's, probably going to be bad news for Iowa. But this spring is really where they develop, right? So I'm interested to see how those two perform. And I'm assuming that Brendan Sullivan's going to go in the portal afterwards, right? I think we all at least a little bit are. But if he's your backup, I think that gives me a little bit of hope. Mm-hmm. But I really want to see how Hank does in this offense. I know he started a couple games last year for Auburn. One, he looked really good, 4 touchdowns and 250 yards passing. The other one, he looked kind of shaky, 70 yards, 3 picks. So can he, take that next step and under Tim Lesser's offense? So I think that's really the the question at quarterback is, A, who's your backup when it comes to Hank and Jackson, and B, is Hank your guy next year?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what Brendan. I think everybody's interested to see what Brendan does because it was this time last year that he wrapped up at Northwestern and surprisingly jumped in the portal and ended up here. And you've heard Kirk praise him of just how quickly he picked things up and found a niche, and then ended up having to start a few games. And when he was good, things were a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then UCLA, you saw a little bit of attrition there, and he was getting banged up as well. I was in the same boat as you of like, well, Brendan. He's got 1 year. I saw an article today that talked about him maybe in the running for the 2026 job. As far as I know, he only has 1 year. I'm sure we'll talk to Sully at some point in the next few weeks, and we'll get a little clarity there. But I imagine it's going to be Hank and Jackson fighting for the starting job in 26 as it stands right now. The more I go through this, though, and you'll hear Kirk's philosophy on the portal and how they talk to guys here in a little bit, but I get the sense if Brendan was going to leave, he'd be gone.
Really?
I start to feel more and more Brendan Sullivan likes being a Hawkeye, loves being a Hawkeye. And maybe he's got this sense of, okay, I can be in here, get a bunch of 1 reps in the spring, keep competing in the fall. And hey, if Mark Gronowski is the guy and Brendan Sullivan can still be your red zone short yardage changed up, because Mark Gronowski can run, Brendan Sullivan, in comparison, can fly a little bit. You've seen the agility and the elusiveness. He can bring a little something extra in those. I was still a hell of a red zone team with Brendan Sullivan running things. So I wonder if you've got these 2 seniors that just sit in their roles and make the most of it. I think that'd be advantageous for all parties involved. Now maybe Brendan does decide to leave after the spring and he gets all these 1 reps and can take those 1 reps in the spring that maybe he wouldn't have in another spot and then gets to go to another program and get into the fall. But I'll take Brendan Sullivan on the 2025 Hawkeye roster doing what he did in 24 because that was some electric stuff. And if you can go, the old saying is if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks.
I love saying that.
I would argue it would be a nice little spot for Iowa. If you can have Mark Gronowski, who's going to be on his way to becoming the winningest quarterback in the history of NCAA football, if all goes according to plan here, his next one will be his 50th at the NCAA level. And your backup is a guy like Brendan Sullivan who brings that spark and energy. I'm fine with that.
The parallels are not exactly 100% there, but at least I have to think, too, about how much the coaches would want Brendan Sullivan to stay, and Brendan Sullivan is a little bit incentivized to stay because we do have Mark Gronowski, who is coming off a surgery in the offseason, and I think, going to be ready until like June or so is what I think I've been hearing about his like.
Well, that's when they start off-season workouts, so he'll be ready by June.
I think Kirk said he'll be
in the
thrown
next
in a
couple
few
weeks.
weeks.
He'll start some light throwing.
Right. So it's like you've got a guy who like is at least coming off of that, and so you maybe don't exactly know what you're going to have week 1 when they open the season. So there's a great safety net that you're going to have there in Brendan Sullivan if he's still on the roster. Yes, I'm sure you'd be comfortable having Hank Brown as your guy if something happens to Mark, but overall you'd love to have somebody who's got real in-game, on the field, in Kinnick Stadium experience in a guy like Brendan Sullivan. So I have to think that the coaches would just like kill to have Brendan still on the roster come the fall.
I'm interested that you brought up, if Brendan doesn't decide to move on and sticks around, if there's a possible red zone, because Mark Gronowski had like 30 rushing touchdowns.
He can run,
He rushes like 300 to 400 yards a game. When it's Cade McNamara and he can't and his knee's kind of banged up, I get that. But
That's true.
And it made perfect sense for the team last year. I'm just wondering, like, it's an interesting thought, but would it be a little different,
Yeah.
Like,
It would be different.
I could do that. Those are
not
my
anything we've seen at Iowa before, right? I mean,
and if he needs to throw, he's a better option than Brendan Sullivan, right? And it's more of a dual threat, really. So that'd be interesting if they, if he stays, obviously, if they decide to utilize him. I mean, put them both on the field, right? That'd be interesting, right? I don't know what they do with the other one, but
Warren, Mike, and Tim just stirring and figuring things out. It's going to be fun, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the portal approach for Iowa. We just talked about Max White and John Nestor entering the portal here in the last 48, 72 hours. Iowa's got to find a new pregame hype speech guy. Max White was a dude following up after Joe Evans, and he was such a great locker room guy, a legacy guy. And boy, one of the most joyous moments of the last couple of years was that touchdown against Western Michigan. I know you talked to his dad, and that family was so thrilled about that moment. But Kirk Ferentz says Iowa does things a little differently when it comes to initiating those conversations in this new era of figuring out the roster limit and everything like that. He spoke about Iowa's portal approach yesterday.
Yeah, we chose to let our guys know in December if we couldn't guarantee a 105 spot. We told our players that and allowed them to go on visits and still be part of the team and still go to the bowl and all that. But I just think we were all in agreement staff-wise that the right thing to do is let guys know and be transparent with them. And we've got a handful of guys that know right now they don't have a guarantee that chose to stay here this spring instead of go out and find places. But it turns out, like, I guess nobody else is doing that. I actually had a son coaching at the FCS level, and I told him you ought to wait till end of April and just get your net out and catch whoever gets, whoever falls through, because apparently that's what's going to go on. From a competitive standpoint, that would have been smart. I just didn't think, it was the right thing to do. And these guys come in here and work hard every day. So, we've had a lot of guys that have found new homes, whether it be in the MAC, FCS. John Pascuzzi went to West Virginia on a scholarship. So I'm thrilled for all those guys. So we're pretty much there. So the hard discussions have already taken place.
And that has to be a different kind of mentality for some of these guys. When you've been told in December or getting into January and February, hey, this spring, keep in mind, this might be your last 15 practices here. I'm curious of just what that competitive drive and how those, guys that are playing for a spot at the bottom of the two deeps or playing for special team spots, like there's a different approach, I would think maybe, or maybe you just keep it business as usual of fighting for roster spots. I mean, that feels like NFL training camp type stuff, and you've got a guy who has plenty of NFL experience in Kirk. Now having his hand forced, he said he wished the NCAA would give teams a year to kind of figure out how to get these rosters to fit. But it's a fascinating dynamic going into this spring, knowing there are guys that have been told, hey, bust your tail even harder than usual because these 15 are going to go a long way in deciding what we do going into the summer.
Yeah, and you just never know if you're a guy who's number 2, number 3 on the depth chart. Yeah. Somebody might go down in practice, and it's like, all right, now's your time that you've got to step up. So hopefully there aren't guys checking out for those practices because you never know when your number is going to be called.
I wish I would have done this, but put a number by everyone on the roster right now and just see what number they're at. And then during that soundbite,
just to number everybody.
Yeah, because you have to be by 105. Is that the cap? Yeah, they're probably over that right now in the spring. Obviously, he said as much and said that he told the players, which obviously is the right thing to do ethically and morally, but it's kind of sad to hear that most football schools, typical that they're not doing that. They're kind of probably just stacking players and then we'll cut them later on when they can't go out and help a rival or whatever.
Yeah.
But during that soundbite, I was kind of curious if, there's 5 quarterbacks right now on the roster, right? I wonder if they've already said, hey, we're going to get down to 4. Just because with the roster constraints through a season, is it important to have another cornerback or linebacker because of depth and D-line than quarterback? It's just interesting conversations that we'll probably never know because we don't get to talk to the coaches and hear those real answers. But I just thought in my head, like, I wonder how many they're capping each possession by.
If I were predicting a quarterback to leave, I would say Jackson Stratton might be the one that I would say is more likely to leave, only because, like, even in a next year scenario, I know there's been a lot of good talk about Jimmy Sullivan as a quarterback, and they have some good high school guys coming in where it's like, Jackson, it's harder to see a path forward for him being the guy in Iowa City. Even if he's here next year, it's like you've got Hank Brown to compete with. And so if they did want to get down to 4, I'd say he'd
even more than Brendan Sullivan?
He's
got 1 year left.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I still think that that he might stick around as a guy who, like, again, is like your number 1 backup and still sees some potential short yardage or goal line packages.
Sure.
That's why it fascinates me, that battle between Hank and Jackson, because Hank's the newer guy. They're both Tim's guys. Tim went out to SoCal and watched Jackson throw and brought him in, and one of those guys that you go, okay, yeah, there's another quarterback, and then come November, yeah, he's your quarterback. It is a fascinating battle because there's incentive, you would think, to say, like, hey, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you got 2 seniors at QB 1 and 2 if Brendan stays, Hank Jackson take this season to just lock in on the playbook, make the most of your reps when you get them. QBs 3 and 4 aren't getting a ton of reps at practice, but hey, stay ready because come this time next year, you two and Jimmy are in a 3-way competition to try to win this battle and come out of spring being the leader in the clubhouse going into the fall. It's fascinating, but also if you are Jackson Stratton, and we haven't got a chance to talk to him, I imagine we'll get an opportunity at some point. You know, do you want to get back closer to home? Do you want more of a guarantee than being QB 3 or 4 when you've stepped on the field in College Park and out in Los Angeles and back at Kinnick and shown you can hang in there and play at a Power 4 level and make some really nice throws? That's a tough spot to go from. And again, it was because of injuries that you get thrown into the mix like that. To go from, hey, I'm taking 1 reps and I'm prepping to be the guy, to you might not get practice reps if you're not QB 3 or 4 or QB 3. It's a tough spot, and I don't envy that situation. That's got to be a roller coaster to go from getting on campus and just trying to get comfortable, and then, oh, now you're QB 2. Okay, Brendan went down. You're QB 1 now, and you're a quarterback the rest of the year, and then get into the spring, and they're like, you might not get reps. That's a roller coaster. But again, we'll see what happens.
Definitely, but I think there are some like realistic, expectations on his level of play, just because like he did get those wins against Maryland and Nebraska, but it was a very, I thought, limited offense.
He wasn't asked to do it.
He wasn't exactly.
But he did
for
what was
219 yards in 3 games. I know one of them was 1/2, the UCLA game. He came in.
And the screen to Caleb was quite a bit of yards. But, I look at the scenarios of he had that 3rd and 8 against Maryland where he gunned it on the right side and made a perfect throw. He had that 3rd and long at UCLA where he found Gill. I mean, those are the couple throws that, again, within the context of the guy who is the 4th quarterback on the depth chart coming in live football on the road and making those throws. You're like, boy, it'd be great to have in the room, but you also can't blame him.
If he
wants to take that somewhere else, because he's shown he's good enough to play at any level he wants to. Well, speaking of showing you can play at any level you want, 14 Hawkeyes this week on Monday showed out for NFL scouts back in Iowa City. We got to talk to 5 of them afterwards. It was just great to see the guys again. Been a few months. As Jay pointed out, Jay Higgins said, I haven't done media in 3 months. Got to get used to this again. Jay Higgins is doing fine when it comes to talking to the media. We heard from him, Nick Jackson, Luke Lachey, Quinn Schulte, and Deontay Craig after they worked out during pro days. Here's a little bit from them about just what they've learned about Iowa's reputation in the NFL draft process and what they're excited about and what they've done getting ready for next month's NFL draft and free agent opportunities that could come after that.
You heard for 5 years here, Iowa's a pro program. It gets you ready for the league. Has that become more apparent as you've gone through this process?
Yeah, you can. You definitely see how other guys operate. Then just it's when you're down training. I guess at that point there's no coach. There's no one really holding you accountable. You can show up to workouts when you want. You can come whatever time. And little stuff like that where you start quickly understanding that some people from other programs got away with certain things, and things like that kind of let you know like Iowa's a little different.
What kind of Iowa linebacker names have other teams brought up to you? I mean, are they talking about Josie and Neiman and all these other guys?
Yeah, they're making some jokes that they're like, you Iowa linebackers, we might not draft you guys, but you guys just stick around forever, I'm like, yeah, I mean, Coach Wallace is, we're mutts. I mean, that's the mentality of it. And I was like, you guys drafted Campbell first round, So, yeah. And he's pretty good. That's so I mean, just we in with those guys, and they talk about the linebackers and the history of the program, and Coach Parker and Coach Wallace and what they've produced over the years, just from that linebacker D-line room and DB room too.
When we were, gathering up today for measurements, the scout from the Rams was talking about how he loves coming to Iowa. It's a great spot, and it's really cool to hear that. And I'm sure they don't say that everywhere. Maybe they do, but to certainly hear that it's great. And I've only ever, been here and loved every second of it. I know it's a great program for developmental and just a pro style, program. And it's what I've learned from a lot of the coaches is they love Coach Ferentz and respect him a lot. And I mean, who wouldn't? So it's a great spot.
Certainly we've sent a lot of safeties to the league the past couple of years, and obviously being here at Iowa and Coach Parker's representation, it'd be nice for scouts or people to understand that hopefully that a Iowa safety will be ready for the league, and I think I'm ready. I think I've shown that for 3 years consistently. So I just think my consistency of production each year has been there, especially my ball skill talent too. So hopefully a team I just need one team to fall in love with me, and I'm just go from there.
Have they brought up the Music City Bowl tape much?
Yeah, I had a couple scouts kind of ask me, like, where was that at all year? And I said the same thing. I'm like, look, I have no excuse for it. Like, I felt like I was in position a lot, but I don't know, things just fell my way in that game, and I was ready to make the plays. And obviously I had a little extra motivation knowing it was my last game. So, but yeah, it's definitely got brought up a couple times, but, I just tell them the truth, like, hey, I felt like I was in position, and, I just got to make the plays. But I know I'm capable. I put together 4 years on the field showing that I can do that. So, if there's any questions, then, just turn on the tape and you'll see it.
Deontay Craig was also very excited. He told me he went sub-5 in the 40. He was very excited about that. So, he had a lot of opportunity in Nashville there in the Music City Bowl, and certainly showed a little bit of that throughout his Hawkeye career. ESPN this morning or overnight published their full 7-round mock draft, at least updated a month out from the draft. Matt Miller, who's their guru, and you see there your first Iowa selection off the board would be at 44. Caleb Johnson in the 2nd round to the Dallas Cowboys. He also has no other Iowa player off the board then until round 5, and that would be Castro going to the Eagles. Would love to see a couple ball hawks, Doughboys teaming up there, and then not another Hawkeye until Jay would go off the board with the first pick in round 7, and there'd be a few Hawkeyes there with Luke Lachey, who ran sub 480. He said he went 4.77 the 40. Think of Luke Lachey, a guy that big, running sub 4.8 routes on you there at Soldier Field. Jamari Harris would then go at 2.36 to the Texans. Desmond King, another former Iowa defensive back, who did pretty well in Houston playing the NFL. Right after that, 2.39 would be Y.A. Black, also going to the Cowboys, reuniting with Caleb. And that would be it. No Nick Jackson, no Quinn Schulte, Luke Elkin, who, again, we were talking about, man, that's a guy who could, if he gets one of those long snapper spots in the NFL, there's your next 12, 15 years in the league having success. And Mason Richmond, a guy who started 50-plus games on the line. We'll see if he gets out there.
No Craig.
Kyler Fisher, Deontay Craig, we didn't see. Tyler Ellsbury went through Pro Day as well. What are our thoughts about who we're going to see, where we're going to see him in the draft, and who are we going to be talking about, even 2-3 years from now, of like, hey, another Iowa guy that maybe didn't get drafted high. You heard Nick talk about, might not draft you, but you're going to hang around in the league. Who are those names that we think as we sit a month out from the draft?
No Connor Colby either.
No Connor Colby either, yeah.
No O-lineman in the draft. I think, would this be 2 years in a row they haven't? I mean, the draft is a month and a half out, and so we still have a few things to decide before then. This is about, well, it's a little more set in stone than the depth chart, but we at least get a good idea of things. But I
Third year in a row with no offensive
third year in a row,
lineman
no
drafted.
offensive. That would be just really wild.
Hey,
so
Since Tyler Linderbaum was a number 1 pick.
But hey, Alaric Jackson wasn't drafted, and he just got a bag from the Rams. So, again,
Yeah.
that's why we talk about Iowa's reputation as a program. You might not get drafted, but you're going to find a spot more often than not, it feels like.
I don't know if I'd say there are any major surprises on who I am or am not seeing. I mean, I kind of felt like after last year ended, I could see a lot of guys that I'm like, okay, these could be somewhere between 5th to 7th round guys, or early free agent signings once the draft is over. So I don't think I'm necessarily surprised by anything I'm seeing or not seeing on here, just based on maybe Iowa's pedigree with tight ends, and it sounded like he had a pretty good combine. Like maybe Lachey I could see going a little bit higher up in round 5 or 6, but nothing else that really stands out as like a snub or a, wow, he's getting high. Maybe Caleb Johnson I would have expected to go a little bit higher than that. I know it seems like early on people were saying maybe late first round, early second round. Right now he's kind of jammed in the middle there of the second round.
Yeah, I think if we went back to the beginning of last year, we thought Iowa's season would have a few more wins, a little more passing offense, and that's where like Luke Lachey, I thought heading into that, like he could be a top
was our
3-round
preseason
pick
MVP
because of
pick,
his But I mean, you look at it, he only had like 230 yards receiving.
Hasn't had a touchdown since the Music City Bowl at the end of 22. I think I keep coming back to Mike and I were talking about this in the newsroom. Like, couldn't you see like 3 years from now him being a Pro Bowl caliber guy? And like, what do you mean he didn't score a touchdown his last 2 years of college? Like, just his size, got a little speed. I mean, again, a guy that big running sub 4.8. If he gets in the right system that's using those tight ends, and again, it's the NFL, everyone's using tight ends. Man, you feel like he could be a steal for somebody wherever he goes.
Yeah.
You know, Sebastian Castro is another one where I think last year, if he would have left for the NFL, he'd probably be higher than a 5th-round pick just after the year he had last year. And, you know, I think we thought that he'd be, like, he could have vaulted into the top 1st-round pick, but that didn't pan out with the season that, 8-5, kind of middling, and there was some times where he got beat. I don't want to say he took a step back, but the tape probably does show a little bit of a, not regression, but just he wasn't as excellent as he was, because he was really good that year, I don't want to...
That Wisconsin tape from 23.
Yeah.
That one game. If that's the only tape you had, he'd be a top pick. But no, I think these are, about right. When you look at mock drafts, I looked at 3 or 4 that had Caleb anywhere in the 2nd round to the 4th, right? And it just depends on what team needs a running back and what team likes him. And me and Mitch were talking about just about the number of quality running backs that they have with both the Ohio State guys, Travion Henderson. They have Amari Hampton and what's his name from Boise? Genty. I forgot his first name. Ashton Genty. I almost said Alshon.
Alshon Jeffrey.
Anyway,
former Bears wide receiver in South Carolina.
Yeah, maybe a different year. Caleb goes as the 1st or 2nd running back, but it is sitting there. You're like, wow, a lot of guys on the back end. But if a team likes them, they could probably sneak up in the 4th round. I remember, I don't think Kittle was projected to go in the 3rd or 4th. He was a 5th rounder?
Yeah.
All right.
And again, talk about a guy who you look at his Iowa numbers and they were good. I mean, I think he had 5 touchdowns in 16, but George Kittle on that Rose Bowl team was the 2nd best tight end. His cousin, Henry Kruger-Coble, was the guy. I mean, how many great catches did 80 have? And then, George was starting to rise up there. But, yeah, I mean, the NFL's onto it. They know they can get value in these Iowa guys. And you almost wonder if that's keeps some of these guys from going higher because there's this thought of like, well, these Iowa guys, they're going to drop and we can get them for deals. Again, I go back to Alaric Jackson, who was a fantastic left tackle at Iowa, dropped out, didn't get drafted, was a free agent, and he just signed, I think, for 30-some guaranteed to be the left tackle out in Los Angeles. I mean, he's turned into a cornerstone. And how many stories are like that where you're like, it almost doesn't matter where these guys get drafted. It matters financially, certainly, but, go back to Nick's line that he's heard scouts say, like, man, we don't draft you, but you stick around. It's like, oh, gee, thanks.
Conversely, you also have to think, too, that, like, being an Iowa guy has to help somebody's draft stock if you're a tight end especially. Sure. Like Luke Lachey, again, looking at the last 2 years, it's not like there was a ton of on-field, in-game production that he would have put out there that would be deserving of somebody getting drafted, but the fact that he's an Iowa guy and people know this program, maybe that's the only reason why he is on a draft board right now, potentially getting in there in the 7th round.
Yeah, that could be a point too. Yeah.
Somebody maybe that I skipped over that I could see going a little higher is Jamari Harris, because there was a lot of points last year that he looked like he could be one of the best defensive backs in the country, if not in the Big Ten alone. And so to see him kind of late in the 2nd round or late in the 7th round, getting close to Mr. Irrelevant territory, I don't know. Based on what I saw out of him on the field last year, I could see him maybe more appropriately as a 4th or 5th round pick.
I refuse to believe Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson don't catch on somewhere and do something. I mean, even production's there, but also just the types of guys they are. Same with a guy like Quinn Schulte, who's probably going to get a free agent deal. And, why wouldn't you want experience, leadership, those intangible type things, whether they're a special teams whiz or getting into the 2 deeps or whatever it may be? Like, I have to think that that Iowa reputation sticks in NFL GM's minds and guys who are assembling rosters. Hey, if we can stow this guy on the practice squad and just a guy that we know is going to bust his tail and has that attention to detail, these Phil Parker guys, I have to think that that pays dividends in some way, shape, or form for some of these guys to at least latch on. And then, boy, once they're with a franchise, okay, now go prove it. And we've seen that time and again as well. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun to see what these guys do, because we've seen it from the back end. Austin Blythe, who we should say congratulations, the new head coach for Williamsburg High School. Kurt Ritchie, his father-in-law, going to Cornell, and has just announced today Austin's going to take over his alma mater and lead the Raiders to their next era. So, but he was out of that Rose Bowl team in the 2016 draft. He was the only Hawkeye drafted, and that was the 7th round. And he had 7 years in the league where he was a damn good offensive lineman and made a heck of an impact in Indy and then Los Angeles, and played a year in Kansas City, and then wrapped up in Seattle and was playing as good as ever in Seattle. So all you need is that chip in a chair, and you can make a lot of stuff happen. But we've also seen Cooper DeJean, one of the biggest names in the NFL over the last couple months, fell to the 2nd round. People wondered what was going on. The league knows now what's going on. So it's
Still hate my Packers didn't pick him up because they could have used a corner.
There are a lot of
Jair was out almost all year.
Bases that aren't happy that Cooper fell, but man, it's an exact science, and Kirk talked about that a little bit yesterday as well. Of just, yeah, you don't know until those guys get out there, and a lot of teams will learn some tough lessons, and others will find gems, find diamonds. That's the fun part.
Draft weekend is going to be a particularly tough one here in the sports department because we have 3 events converging at the same time. We have draft weekend, what is it, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they do draft day?
Yeah.
Spring practice, open spring practice is on Saturday.
Yeah.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, also the Drake relays that weekend.
It's a wonderful time.
It's going to be a wild time. So did they move back the spring practice one week or something?
I feel like it's usually that night. It would have been like April 19th.
Yeah.
It does feel
A little late.
a little later. Maybe I'm not remembering this right. If somebody knows and you're in the chat, say something. I feel like they've spread practices out more. Like they've got a full month where they're getting these 15 practices in. So I feel like maybe they're spread out a little more than usual, or maybe they started late. I'm not sure, but
I'd like to look at the calendar from last week.
Feels a little late.
Like they're practicing yesterday, they practiced today, but they're skipping Friday and then practicing Saturday, putting like skipping days and stuff like that.
I'm wondering if Saturday will be their first practice in Kinnick. I know that's always a fun one to see the videos come out of. Just see the guys back at Kinnick.
Makes sense to have it on Saturday, just kind of like a game,
There you go.
game-like.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of practices, we do get media availability really the next 3 Thursdays leading up to that spring game on the 26th. I think our idea is that we're going to start doing kind of spring check-ins every Friday, not tomorrow, but 3 Fridays after that, just leading up. Next Thursday morning, we get 20 to 30 minutes at the beginning of practice to get in, get some video, and then later that morning we'll get some media availability with some of the players. Maybe some of these transfers we'll get to talk to for the first time. So we'll have in 1 week at this time some first looks at the 2025 Iowa Hawkeyes from the practice field there in Iowa City. It'll be interesting to see who's flashing. We'll get our first video of Mark Gronowski wearing Hawkeye stuff, walking around on the practice field. It's going to be enthralling. So we'll have that for you, and then there's media availability with players a couple more of those days, and then let me check. I know there's a coordinator's presser at some point as well. That'll be coming up Wednesday, April 23rd, the Wednesday before open practice there on the 26th, where we'll also talk with KF and some players as well. So there's plenty to get to. We might have to do a Friday spring scrimmage preview one if we've got that coordinator stuff, an opportunity to listen. If we can do a podcast about football, folks, we're going to do it. So we'll keep cranking out the content there for sure. But final thoughts before we wrap this spring prospectus for the rest of us here.
Yeah, just looking forward to seeing any more portal additions coming into the Hawkeyes. I don't know how many roster spots are going to have available, but any of those kind of acquisitions, really curious to see who ends up landing where.
Yeah, anytime you can make your team better, regardless. I know the portal opens like next month, but I'm excited again to see future quarterback for the first time next week. Not going to be throwing or anything, but see some skill guys do some catching and running and stuff, like just to see how it pans out. Like who's going to be in that first group?
Yeah, will
be interesting, at least in the wide receivers. Who's going to be that third running back? You're not just going to have 2 running backs all season. You're going to have 3, 4. I mean, heck, they had some, will those guys who were freshmen last year, will they start making an impact? It's going to be super interesting to see because running back, they don't always stay healthy, and you need like a plethora of them to get through a season. So who's going to be those guys that are carrying and some guys with new numbers. See, Jazz is number 4 now.
Yep, Jazz is number 4. Max Whitehead flipped to 17 before he left, and I believe there's somebody else in there I think who may have. KJ Parker was 84. He's now 12. So, hey, you were 12 at Iowa. If Ricky Stanzi taught us anything, things are going to go well for you there. Brandon Smith as well, another great wide receiver that wore 12. So we'll be back here next Friday with fresh video from practice, our first discussions with players ahead of 2025. Football's here. I know it's Sweet 16. It's opening day. Pigskin ruling here on Eye on the Hawks. We'll see you next time. For Mike and Owen, I'm Mitch.